Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and colleagues, my name is Joshua and it's an honor to be here today as a moderator for this session. So for today's panel, titled Heat from a Historical, Traditional and Cultural Lens, today's panel offers a unique opportunity to explore the diverse perspectives on how different societies have historically understood and managed heat. We are privileged to have with us a panel of distinguished speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this discussion. So together, our speakers will provide a multifaceted view of how historical, traditional, and cultural perspectives contribute to our understanding of heat-related issues. So I encourage all of you later to engage with their presentations and to participate in the Q&A discussion that will follow their presentations. So thank you for your attention, and let's begin this insightful session. So first up, we have Dr. Christopher Courtney, an Associate Professor of Modern Chinese History at Durham University. Dr. Courtney is an accomplished social and environmental historian with a focus on Wuhan and its hinterland. His research, including the award-winning monograph, The Nature of Disaster in China, has significantly contributed to our understanding of historical environmental challenges. Today, he will share insights on heat and health in Chinese history. Professor Courtney, please.
So, how am I advancing this? Okay. Can you all hear me using this rostrum mic? Okay. Great. So thanks for that introduction and for the opportunity to participate in this forum. I am feeling somewhat outnumbered, as I think possibly with Joshua, the only historians here at this event. And we've been hearing so much about the current situation of heat and also some dire predictions about what might happen in the near future with heat. So it falls to me to talk about some of the things that happened in the past to do with heat. As was mentioned, I am primarily a historian of the city of Wuhan. Before that was a city that was infamous for being the epicenter of the COVID pandemic. It was infamous, in China at least, for its heat. When you mention the fact you do your research in Wuhan to other people in China, they say, how can you stand living in that place during the summer months? It's known as one of China's oven cities, regularly exceeding the maximum temperature ever reached here in Singapore. I was there last summer. It was the hottest summer for 63 years. And the heat, as I'm sure many of you realize, utterly dominates every facet of your life. It determines what you wear, how you work, what you eat, where you go. So I was always kind of surprised when I read historical, anthropological, sociological treatments of the city that heat was almost entirely invisible. It was as if the city and its history took place in this thermally neutral zone. So over the last few years, I have been trying to work out how you could write a history of heat. And I realized quickly that one of the ways you can do this is by talking to local people. So a lot of my research is driven by oral histories, and when you start to talk to people, you realize that everybody has an opinion on heat and the way it has changed. But I also try to delve into the kind of documentary history to look at a longer-term perspective. So I'll be combining both of these approaches in my talk today, in which I'll be talking about heat, the way that people have understood heat, and also the way they have understood the impact of heat on their health. So as a historian, I'm kind of one of those annoying people who likes to point out that many of the things that have been described at this forum as new are in fact not new at all. People have been thinking about them for perhaps centuries or if not thousands of years. And also an annoying person who likes to point out the things that people assume are very old are often quite new and were actually invented fairly recently. So one of those things that is in fact not new at all is worrying about the impact of heat on the body and worrying about heat stroke. So here we have, this is from the Wellcome catalogue, by the way, so thank you again to Wellcome for providing yet another resource for this conference. So here we have, from 500 years ago, a depiction of somebody who is receiving an acupuncture treatment for heat stroke. In fact, we can go much further back. We can go 2,000 years into the past, to the Huangdi Neijing, to the earliest medical Chinese texts. Much of it is to do with the impact of heat on the human body. In fact, in the Greek tradition, the Ayurvedic tradition, and the Chinese traditional medical documents, we can see that heat is one of the major factors people have been thinking about in health for thousands of years, to the extent that some historians describe heat illnesses as some of the earliest observed conditions in the medical canon. I'm a little bit skeptical about that, because if you actually read those old texts and what they're talking about when they talk about the impact of heat, they often say things like, heat will enter your body, stay there for a few months, and then come back later as a fever. So all these febrile conditions, all these fevers that people are talking about, sometimes it's in the winter, it's summer heat being expelled from the body. Nevertheless, there is things like heat stroke with loss of consciousness do more closely mirror what we would today think about as heat stroke. So in fact, people were not just worrying about heat in the past, people probably worried more about heat in the past than we do today, because they used heat as a way to explain what biomedicine would attribute to things like viruses and parasitic infections, these types of things. So it's one thing to worry about heat. What can you actually do about it in the pre-modern world? Well, on the first day of this forum, we were all handed a fan. Probably you didn't think about this as a piece of medical equipment, but in Chinese history, keeping away all of that hot qi and all of those heat poisons with a fan is one of the things that you can do. Later on, we'll be hearing about Penang and some traditional architecture. Many traditional architectural forms, both in China, throughout Southeast Asia, South Asia, were designed to deal with the heat. Things like these sky wells that would draw in these kind of passive forms of cooling that were so popular in architectural forms. A bit more simpler, you could just sleep on a bamboo bed. Bamboo bed is an excellent technology for dealing with, people have been talking about this kind of nighttime heat, which is a particular problem. You have air circulating underneath you. It's a nice cool material. Until recently, this was a very good way of coping with heat. But in addition to these kind of personal and also medical ways people could deal with heat, the government did actually also have some ways of coping with heat. The predominant thing they would use would be ice. So ice collection in China and storage has over 3,000 years of history. In fact, throughout the world, people have been storing ice for a really long period of time. In the north of China, of course, you could go to a frozen lake. This is a picture from the late 19th century. Go to a frozen lake or a frozen river, store ice for a long time, actually distribute it across the entire empire, even to parts of the empire that didn't have any ice. You could also, in the pre-modern period, farm ice, what I describe as farming ice. So the way they would do this is they would go to, in an area that has winter frosts, you would go to a paddy field or a pond, you would scrape ice off the surface of this paddy field during the winter, sprinkle it with salt, and then stack it into these stacks, eventually forming a block so it would coagulate together, and store them in these earth houses that you can see here. Excellent evaporative cooling through these types of houses. You can store ice for up to 2 years in these houses and also distribute it across incredibly extensive cold chains which existed in the Qing Empire. So we're talking like actually as early as the Song dynasty, so 1,000 years of this practice. Later, the British stole this idea and then claimed they invented the cold chain. So a typical thing that British people tend to do. So they would use ice primarily for storing food, but they did also use ice for what I would describe as pre-modern public health interventions. So ice was distributed according to the government system to people who were of a high official rank. So it was kind of a perk of the job. You would get a block of ice to survive the summer. They would put it in these very sophisticated cooling systems. It's kind of the ancestor of an air conditioning unit. So wealthy people already having ice. But during periods of extreme heat, they would also distribute ice to be used by the general population. They would have icing stations throughout the city. It's the kind of Qing dynasty version of a heat action plan. You could go there and travelers and poor people would go along and cool themselves down with the ice. They would also distribute various types of Chinese medicine, we'll be hearing more about later from the next speaker, that are used to deal with heat. This is something that's still done in China today. So 2022 heat wave, the traditional Chinese Medical Bureau will release prescriptions to say what's the best medicines that people can use to treat the problem with heat. They would even give ice to prisoners. during this period. And they would use ice to cool down animals. So all of the kind of lowly people in society are being provided with ice so they don't die during periods of extreme temperature. This is limited to Beijing. It's not throughout the entire empire, but you can see people were thinking about these things. Again, we think anew. People have been thinking about them for quite a long time. There was not, however, a general consensus about the use of ice. So here we have Li Shijian. I'm sure anybody here who knows about traditional Chinese medicine knows this guy is one of the most famous medical practitioners of the late Ming, compiles this amazing 9-volume book of natural history. And his opinion on the use of ice was somewhat negative. He said, to consume ice during the hottest period in the summer is a behavior in opposition to the climate, and this is why it is not suitable for man. The ice will enter the abdomen where the cold clashes with the heat, and this will give rise to all types of illness. Any of you who came with us yesterday on the community visit and spoke to these lovely elderly people who we were having conversations with will find that they were saying exactly the same thing. So the Red Cross volunteers were saying, during the hot weather, you should be drinking cold water. And I was talking to them, and they said, we don't drink cold water. It will damage our bodies. So if you're forming policies about how to try and get people to engage with ways of ameliorating the effects of heat nowadays, you need to realize you're going against not just decades of tradition, but actually centuries, if not millennia of tradition of people not wanting to consume cold water. Incidentally, up until the 19th century, the exact same thing was said in Europe. People would not give people who had heat stroke, or sunstroke as they would say then, cold water. They'd think that's the worst thing you can do. Instead, they would put you in a hot bath and bleed you as a way of treating sunstroke. My working theory is the reason that this belief is shared throughout so much of the world is the fact that they saw people with heat stroke. The people with heat stroke wanted to drink lots of water. They drank loads of water. They died anyway. And then they said, oh, look, they drank the water, so they died. But anyway, there's kind of lots of reasons why we can think about this, but it's still a kind of issue you need to think about today. Okay, so that's a little bit on the pre-modern era. As we move into the modern era, the nature of heat hazards changes for people in China. One of the reasons it changes is because so many of them move to this region. Of course, people have been coming here for a long time, but certainly since the 18th century, you see mass migration of people from China into Southeast Asia. Some of them are coming from places where there's kind of subtropical or tropical conditions already. Some of them are not. And one of the things, if you read migrant accounts from this period, that they're most worried about, it's all the hot qi they'll find in the Nanyang, all the kind of Southeast Asian hot weather, the miasmatic qi, the jiang qi, and all these kind of hot poisons that they might encounter in Southeast Asia. At the same time, in China itself, you're starting to see the development of modern industrial cities. On the first day, and in fact throughout this forum, we've been hearing about the urban heat island effect. This is not anything new. In fact, cities have always been a little bit hotter than their hinterlands. When you start to see the development of modern industrial cities with industries that emit lots of waste heat, and also the changing architectural form of the city, so changing from wood to brick, and particularly the coating of all the surfaces of the earth with things like asphalt, which absorb far more heat and then radiate it out afterwards, you start to see well, people don't describe it as the urban heat island effect, but we can see kind of cultural ways of talking about the same effect. There's all of these articles from the early 20th century about how dangerous cities are because they're so hot. Some of the people who are considered to be the most at risk are the people we can see here. Right? So rickshaw pullers, people who spend their entire lives out on these hot streets under the hot sun, exerting themselves. And a lot of by this time, we have both biomedical practitioners and traditional medical practitioners working side by side in big cities. So the former would talk about things like sunstroke and heat stroke. The latter would talk about things like hot toxins, hot qi, and all these types of things that enter the rickshaw puller's body from the feet and infect their body. They're talking, I would say, about the same thing, the problems of being a kind of exploited worker in an increasingly hot city. As well as these kind of new urban heat island effects that people are being noticing during this period, there are also new terminology for expressing the experience of extreme heat. In the 1890s, I know we have any of our meteorologist friends here, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, As far as I know, it's the 1890s that we first start to see the term heat wave being used. The first usage I found is someone saying, why is everyone talking about heat waves nowadays? What a silly way to talk about heat, is the first kind of documented etymology of the term heat wave. It's, at this stage, very much associated with an urban phenomenon. Before then, it's been called the heated term or the heated period or something like that. It's in New York that people first start talking about heat waves. But the term very quickly spreads to China, where people also start talking using the same language to talk about this particular urban experience of heat. 1908 is the earliest Chinese use of the term that I've been able to find. So in addition to creating new forms of heat hazard, industrialization also creates new ways to ameliorate the effects of heat. The invention of absorption and later vapor compression refrigeration means that people are able to create, refrigerators. They're also able to create artificially produced ice. Doesn't have a very big impact in China. As I've already mentioned, there's a very, very extensive system of ice that already exists there, natural ice. The area it does have a big impact is here, right? Because you couldn't ever really make ice in the tropics. You could ship it from America or somewhere like that. But when they start to have this, people start to use artificial ice a lot. Eventually, they start to use it in their markets. The ice melts, goes onto the ground, and we have the term wet market being born, right? So it's linked into this idea of ice that's being developed during this period. Incidentally, as a historian of Wuhan, I'm obliged to point out there are no wet markets in Wuhan, right? The term Wuhan wet market is not a culturally meaningful one. Singapore invents that term. It never spreads to Wuhan. So we have artificial ice being produced. At the same time, we are also starting to see things like the electric fan, which we heard described on the first day as this kind of old-fashioned technology. The beginning of the 20th century, there was nothing more modern than an electric fan. Here we can see a cartoon, an electric fan having an argument with a hand fan. This is supposed to represent tradition facing off against modernity. If you had enough money and if you had your house connected to the electricity, you would definitely want an electric fan in the early 20th century. Unless you're one of the many people who did not believe that this was very good for your health. So the idea was that, several different ideas about electric fan. One is that this cold chi coming at you too quickly would make your body become sick. There's another idea that it would blow the chi, or sometimes people would actually say oxygen, away from your face and cause you to suffocate. And all of these ideas and phobias that develop, even Chiang Kai-shek refused to use, who was the leader of China at the time, refused to use an electric fan. Again, like not drinking cold water, this is still a dominant fear that's held in many places in Asia, not just China, actually not so much China anymore. In Korea, people worry about fan death as a phenomenon. I was talking to people here earlier at the forum in Indonesia. There's lots of kind of cultural prescriptions against using electric fans. And indeed, some of the same ideas that we see in the 1920s are still being used today. So again, those of you who are trying to design policies, thinking about this, might want to think about this as a kind of cultural prescription against the use of particular types of technology. At the same time, we do actually, at this time, start to see the introduction of air conditioning. So air conditioning in American technology starts to be used in places like cinemas, dance halls. It's system air conditioning. It's like the air conditioning we have here, right? So it's big systems. You can't really install it in people's homes very easily. And then after the Japanese invasion of China in the late 1930s, the imports dry up and it disappears from China, only to return really in the 1990s. I'll talk about that in a moment. So by 1949, those of you who know Chinese history will know, the Communist Party take over. And the Communist Party are actually very concerned about the issue of heat. So by this time, in places like America, there's been lots of military experiments into thermoregulation, all of these types of things, and occupational health. Also, some studies being done by people working in factories. This is very interesting to the Maoist state, partly because it has this desire to rapidly develop the economy, and partly because heat is conceived as a class problem. So here we have the three classes in Mao's China who are going to be affected by heat: the industrial proletariat, the soldiers, and the peasantry, three of the good classes of the Mao regime. So it's kind of an obligation seen, at least paid lip service to, by the state that you need to tackle the problem of heat. And you see from the 1950s onwards a new form of governance, this heat stroke prevention or summer heat prevention campaigns, which are initiated by the government of Mao Zedong. Many of the things that people have been talking about at this forum, issues specifically dealing with maternal health, issues specifically dealing with occupational health. All of these things were issues that were dealt with by the regime from the 1950s. You had propaganda campaigns to try and teach people about the problems of heat. You had, like, the story of heat stroke pamphlets being used to try and inculcate ideas about thermoregulation. Interestingly, at this time, typically for this period, they combined both biomedical ideas about thermoregulation with traditional theories about thermoregulation. So how can we best exploit tradition in order to try and cool down our population? They even started to try and develop their own forms of technology. They don't have, as I mentioned, air conditioning beyond some specialist industries, but they start to try and develop things like air raid shelter air conditioning. They're digging out air raid shelters everywhere, right? Because they're worried about being bombed first by the Americans and then by the Soviet Union. And so they build all these air raid shelters. They notice it's cooler. People will go to those areas and sleep. So they try and draw all of this air out into factories in order to cool down these factories using this form of cooling. And they have actually used this subsequently. There are some continual experiments in China about using these kind of forms of ventilation to try and cool down areas today. For the most part, however, and here we're getting into kind of more my oral history side, the people who I've spoken to did not rely upon these techniques. Instead, they did this. In the cities, in China, particularly places like Wuhan, the oven cities, in the summer months, you would lay out a bamboo bed and you would sleep outside, just as I showed you earlier, people have been doing for centuries, if not millennia, in China. This is a photograph from Wuhan. You can see people would sleep out here, but now they're sleeping in communal neighborhood groups. People are actually quite nostalgic about this nowadays. They think they had a great sense of community. As one old guy I interviewed said to me, at that time we were all hot, but we were all hot together. Things begin to change in the 1980s when you see the reintroduction of these technologies. So electric fans are the first ones of these. Electric fans have pretty much disappeared. Everybody I interviewed said they could not afford an electric fan up until the 1970s. In the 1980s, you start to see electric fans, cheap ones first from South Korea and places like that, and then China begins to produce them themselves. And you can see it fits in very nicely with the traditional repertoire of heat alleviation techniques that people are using. You can use an electric fan with a bamboo bed and still continue to sleep outside. You might also prop up the other new technology of the day, which would be the television, and whole communities would gather around, fanning themselves and watching TV. The thing that really marks the total revolutionary change is the introduction of this, right? Air conditioning. First window air conditioners, and then these split system ductless air conditioners that everybody is so familiar with if you spent time living in hot areas today. So an air conditioner is not like an electric fan. You can't incorporate this into your traditional strategies of communal strategies of cooling down. In order to use an air conditioner, you literally have to close your door on your neighbors. So the air conditioner is really a technology that helps to increasingly privatize space, increase the retreat of people from the street into their own apartments, as well as creating forms of thermal comfort that many people appreciate in China today. But they have mixed feelings, to say the least, about air conditioning, which perhaps gives you some inkling as to why. So they can see a building in Wuhan. I took a photograph, maybe a decade ago, of all of the air conditioning units you can see on the outside. But it gives you some sort of this kind of mixed feelings people have are expressed in various different ways, including through the idea that all these people living inside all the time, blasting air conditioning at themselves, are going to succumb to air conditioning disease. Air conditioning disease that you can see here, there are both kind of traditional Chinese kind of more journal articles and these types of things describing this, but also these kind of popular media representations. This guy has blasted himself with an air conditioner and caused himself to suffer facial paralysis as a result. So the air conditioning disease literature combines biomedical ideas with traditional ideas. So they talk about air conditioners as repositories of bacteria and viruses, but they also talk about air conditioners causing cold damage, with very old kind of idea about the way, dating back to the Huangdi Neijing, taking like 2,000 years to the way that people have thought about people getting sick. So air conditioning disease, people do believe in it. It's also, I would say, an expression of the fact that people realize today they're kind of stuck. They're stuck in this air-conditioned world. In Wuhan today, you can go down to the street and see this piece of material heritage, the old way that people coped with heat. You can't touch it because it's too scorching hot during the summer months, but you can look at it. You can see people with their tops off. You're not allowed to take your top off. There's a sign nearby here saying, "Nobody please take your top off. This is an uncivilized behavior." So it's this kind of representation of the heritage of the past, but people realize it's something they can never go back for. So the last point I'd like to make today is we think about learning from tradition. We also have to realize it is often impossible in the world that we have created today to learn from tradition because the traditional forms are no longer viable. That's all I have time for. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Courtney, for your very wide-ranging and very insightful presentation. Next up, we are joined by physician Brandon Yew, a partner and senior Chinese medicine physician at Real Health Medical in Singapore. Physician Yew has an extensive background in both biomedical sciences and traditional Chinese medicine. Brandon began his career as an acupuncturist in Singapore's Tan Tock Seng Hospital's Complementary Integrative Medicine Clinic, gaining extensive clinical experience over 7 years. In private practice, he specializes in herbal medicine, acupuncture, Tui Na, cupping, and gua sha. He also actively educates the public and healthcare professionals through talks and workshops. His presentation, "Our Heaty Earth Needs Cooling Tea, a peek into TCM culture," will delve into the cultural practices of traditional Chinese medicine. Physician Yew, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me loud and clear? Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dr. Joshua Sim, for the introduction. Just a little interesting fact. Yeah, he's my ex-schoolmate. So he's going to owe me a treat later. And thank you, Professor Courtney. I think he makes a very excellent TCM practitioner as well. Yeah, some of the key comments, some of the remarks that he made about traditional Chinese medicine were actually quite on point. Yeah, so I think it's a very good opportunity here that I'm here on today, this stage, because I'm not only just talking about traditional Chinese medicine, but I'm here for the record to clear certain misconceptions. Because a lot of people think about Chinese medicine is so fixated on, I don't want to drink cold stuff, I only want to drink warm stuff, but I'm telling you, that's only one aspect of TCM, all right? Because TCM, we have tailored, or we call it layered forms of approach towards heat. So, without further ado, I will start my presentation. Okay, so this is just the place that I worked in. Okay, I'm from Real Health. Okay, so this company started in 2021, right after the pandemic. Okay, so now we have 2 branches, one in Novena and the other one at Tanjong Pagar. So what has TCM got to do with this forum? Right, you might be thinking. Firstly, traditional Chinese medicine. Today our segment is heat from a historical, traditional, and cultural lens. So just nice, TCM fits very nicely into this segment. Right? In terms of history, we have many years of history. Traditional, yeah, that's why we are called traditional Chinese medicine. And then we have the word Chinese, right? It means that there's a very strong Chinese cultural element, definitely. And this affects especially the Chinese people on how they fight against heat. Especially for Singaporeans, right? Singapore natives are not Chinese. Singapore natives are actually the Malays, right? The indigenous groups. the Orang Lauts. So the Chinese immigrants came to Singapore in the early days, and that's where, right, they bring their historical and cultural knowledge on how to fight against heat. And then when they settle down in Singapore, they start to give birth, have new generations. That's where it incorporated into Singapore's today's demographic. So of course, back then in the early days, right, before we had HDBs, right, housing board flats, we have all these kampongs, where all the different cultures, the Malays, the Indians, Chinese, they all mix around together. So it's a very huge cultural mixing pot. So Chinese not only share their knowledge on how to fight against heat to the Malays and the Indians. I'm pretty sure the Malays and Indians also have their own form of how to fight against heat, and they will also share with the Chinese as well. So in many aspects, like what you hear in Singapore, right, like how we fight against heat is actually a mixed mash, not just only from the Chinese perspective, but also from the Indians and the Malays. So when I talk about Chinese medicine, what comes to mind? May I have a show of hands, how many of you have actually experienced Chinese medicine treatments? Wow, actually, I'm very impressed. I was expecting a way less than that, okay? So we all know, right, Chinese medicine talks about yin and yang, right? Acupuncture, herbal medicine, cupping, cui na. Cui na is manual medicine, that means like massage, okay? Deep tissue massage, pulse taking, and also scraping, also known as gua sha in Chinese. I remember that I talked about this last time, during my talks, and I mentioned about, what do you think, or what comes into your mind when I mention about TCM? I remember someone mentioned old man. So I asked him, what do you mean by old man when I talk about TCM? He means that, it means a traditional Chinese medicine physician is supposed to be an old man, not like me, a young guy. All right, it was a stereotype, all right? Many people think that, seeing a TCM doctor should be someone very old, white hair with beard, not someone like me, okay, very young. So back then, when I first started out as a practitioner, I had a lot of convincing to do, all right? It was very hard for me because patients sometimes would just walk out of the clinic because they think that, I'm just a student or I'm just an intern, okay? Yeah. So I would like to talk about the fundamentals of TCM, okay? Definitely it's developed over many, many years from clinical experiences, okay, that helps to battle against diseases and even strive for better or optimal health. And definitely it also has its own form of distillation, right? There are countless of trial and errors, and all these are being documented in all these historical records. Then lastly, the problem with TCM is that the concepts are very abstract and very philosophical, and yet they have a lot of strong Chinese cultural influence. So that makes TCM very hard to understand, especially if you are non-Chinese, right? So just to let you all know a little interesting fact for students, international students who study in China, Chinese medicine, they actually have to study Chinese language before actually studying TCM. Because a lot of concepts don't make sense if you were to directly translate it into English or any other forms of language. Yeah. Okay, one key concept of Chinese medicine is about holistic, right? Being holistic. And what does it mean? The human body itself is a wholesome system. Okay, we do not separate symptoms. We try to link all the symptoms that are seemingly disconnected to a common root cause. Secondly, we emphasize the relationship between man and the natural surroundings, which is very important, right? Which is very pertinent to our forum today, heat. Lastly, we also take in account into the psychological aspects of the person as well, right? The relationship between man and society. Another one, TCM is highly individualistic, which means whatever prescriptions that we give to the patient is only for the patient. Okay? Please do not share prescriptions with your friends, with your family members. Okay? I know it's out of goodwill, it's out of good intention. Say, hey, you have cough, I also have cough, and I took this prescription, it works wonders. Come, let me share this with you. Many a times, it can go very wrong. Okay, because I encountered this many times. My patients tell me, hey, doctor, you gave me this prescription, it works very well. And I share with someone, and he actually had the opposite effect. Yeah, I say, yeah, because your constitution, your body constitution is very different from that person. So when I gave you that prescription, it's not only just to address your symptoms, but it also addresses your specific body constitution, which can be the opposite of your friend. So that's why the prescription doesn't work on that person, right? Okay, so this is one thing that is very important for Chinese medicine. Another thing about principles of yin and yang. So what is yin and yang? Yin and yang is nothing mystical. It's just a pair of terms to denote the concept of duality, which means you have opposites, right? You have the good and the bad. You have the negative and the positive. Okay? So because it's opposites, so therefore they are contrasting, but at the same time, they are complementary. Okay? And there's a very important key concept here is that nothing is absolute. As you can see from the diagram of yin and yang, right? The white represents the yang, the black represents the yin. But if you can see, the white part has a black spot, and the black part also has a white spot. What does it mean? Nothing is totally absolute, right? Within the positive, you have the negatives. Within the negatives, you also have some positive. So what is our key principle of Chinese medicine is we want to achieve equilibrium, and that's the ideal state, whereby there's a balance, there's harmony, then you are in optimal health. Okay, so going on, how does yin and yang can be applied to the human body? Okay, so these are some of the key principles that we use it to apply to the human body, right? Like qi, blood, all right, and even the body parts, the superficial layers, the deep layers, right? Medial, external. Okay, I'm sure there are some medical professionals here. They might understand this more. Okay, like if I were to use this in more biomedical science concept, right? This is a perfect example of what do you mean by yin and yang, if you represent it in Chinese in biomedical science, right? Like hypothermia, hypotension. All these are opposites of each other. So they are like perfect examples of how yin and yang is being used. So the perception of pathology, right? Just now I mentioned Chinese medicine focuses a lot on the equilibrium between yin and yang. So when yin and yang is unbalanced, that's where diseases arise, right? As you can see, these two diagrams, okay? The yin is more than the yang, or the yang is more than the yin. That's where problem comes. So of course, when yin and yang is imbalanced, you are very susceptible to pathogenic factors, right? Which means factors that will cause you to develop disease. Okay, so things like wind, right? Dampness, fire, dryness, and cold. I'm pretty sure you all might have heard of these terms before. And I'm very sure these are the pain points that modern science people have towards TCM. They realize that all these things sounds very absurd. So let me clear the air. What do all these things really mean? But of course, I'm not going to go through every single one. I'll just go through the main points. Like for instance, wind, all right? Before I go on to that, I just want to let you all know, all these terms like wind, dampness, fire, they are just theoretical constructs or conceptual entities. They are used to categorize or to characterize your pathogens. Okay? They are derived from observing the behavior of various natural climatic phenomena and then ascribing their properties and characteristics onto the human body. Lastly, right, you can have metaphoric or literal. Like for instance, fire. Fire can be metaphoric or literal. And all these pathogenic factors can be from the external. That's why it's called exogenic. Or it can be arising from internal, which is endogenic. Okay, so I just give examples, like for instance, wind. Okay, you all heard about wind many times. TCM say, oh, you have wind in your lungs, you have wind in whatever, your meridians, right? It sounds very absurd, right? Obviously, it doesn't really mean you have wind. So what does wind really mean? So wind in the natural phenomenon, right? It's highly mobile, it's not fixed, right? How do you know there's wind? Right? When the trees are swaying, when you see ripples in the water, there's movement. And it's unpredictable, right? 1 minute, the wind may be blowing from this direction, the other minute it's from another direction. Okay? So how do we use it in the human body? How do we describe it? So you can see certain conditions. They have the word wind in them. It's because these conditions have the characteristics of wind, not because you have wind in your body. Okay, this is just to clear the air. I don't think that, oh, we really think that there's wind inside the body. No, it's just that your ailments, they bear the characteristics of wind. Like, for instance, hives, right? Hives, why do they use the word wind to denote it? Because hives are very unpredictable. Suddenly, you just have, whoa, the whole body just breaks out in hives, right? And suddenly, you just disappear. It's just like wind, right? It comes and goes. Like rheumatism as well, like feng shui, right, in Chinese. Because especially rheumatism, there's a form of rheumatism called migratory rheumatism. Means one moment you may have a pain on the knee, the next moment you have a pain on the head, and then somewhere and it goes around. Just like wind, okay? It's never fixed. It's never stationary. It moves around. So it just means that this condition bears the characteristics of certain natural phenomena. Okay? And then, of course, stroke in Chinese is called 中风, right? Because it's very sudden, just like wind as well. Okay, so now we're going to talk about dampness. Dampness is also another very interesting and commonly heard TCM concept. I think a lot of people try to wrap their heads around it, but they couldn't. Okay? And dampness is also very important, especially when we talk about heat in Singapore. Because when you talk about heat in Singapore, you need to talk about dampness, which also means humidity. So what is dampness? Right? Dampness makes you very heavy, very slow-moving, and it's very humid, it's very sweltering, right? You feel very sticky, and then especially in your home, in your house, right? If you don't clean your house properly, you let moisture accumulate. What happens? You get all the grime, the dirt that's very slimy, it's very sticky, correct? It's very filthy, it's very messy, right? You get all the mold and all the decay. So when it's on the human body, right, you feel very draggy. It's like dragging yourself to work. You feel very heavy, right? Lethargic, low spirits, and you have very greasy skin, and then lastly, you feel sense of bloating. Okay, so these are the common conditions that are associated with dampness. Next, fire. Okay, very, very pertinent to our heat forward. So what actually fire means in TCM? So firstly, we must understand what is the characteristic of fire. It's burning, scorching, blistering, right? It's upflaming. Upflaming means the flame burns upwards. So which means, because of the characteristic of fire, the flame, right? The flame burns upwards, it doesn't burn downwards. So conditions that tend to be on the upper part of the body will tend to have heat. Okay? I'll give examples, right? Like it's dehydrating, correct? Next thing, it's excitatory, it's very stimulative. Right? Fever, you got a headache, you feel giddy, yeah. All these are the upper part of the body, right? You have a red tongue. Chinese medicine, we look at the tongue as well for diagnostics. Sore throat, you got swelling of the eyes, right? Eye infection, ulcers, right? Swollen gums, correct? So all these are on the upper part of the body. And then for the part on excitatory and being stimulative, what happens? Imagine if you have heat in your body, metaphoric heat in your body. It keeps you up at night, right? And you become fiery-tempered as well. Right? Some people, just scold people for no reason, right? You can say that, oh, you're a lot of fire today, correct? That's what the Chinese will say, right? Will describe people. You can't sleep at night, you have insomnia. Okay, like I said, it's dehydrating means you tend to drink a lot of water, you just keep drinking water, right? It's very thirsty. Okay, yellow urine, right? That's a very classic example of what you mean by you're being dehydrated. And then you have red spots on the skin, okay? Right, acne. Okay, infection. And there's a term that I want to introduce is inflammation. Can you see the word in Chinese? Inflammation is what? Yan, right? So there's two fires. Can you see? Yeah. So it actually really denotes the concept of fire. And even the English word as well, inflammation, right? There's a word flame in there. So it also denotes the properties of fire and heat. So now, I will talk about this in the Singapore context, all right, since we are now in Singapore. So as we know, Singapore is very humid and it's very hot, right, because we are very near the equator. And some more, Singapore is a cosmopolitan country, right? So we have this urban heat island effect, right? There's so many high-rise buildings, it traps the heat very easily. And if Singapore gets very unlucky on certain years, we get a haze, okay? Then it adds on to the heat, right? It makes the heat even more difficult to dissipate. Okay, and because of heat, it's going to increase the incidence of common infectious febrile diseases in Singapore, right? Things like hand, foot, mouth disease, gastroenteritis, dengue fever, and other mosquito-borne diseases like chikungunya virus, malaria, okay, or even the Zika virus. Okay, Zika virus is not so common, yeah. Okay, and then even COVID-19 as well. Monkeypox is not really native to Singapore, right? But it's a increasing health concern because of its spread, right, to different parts of the country from Africa. Okay, then other than infectious disease, what about non-infectious diseases that will increase its incidences as a result of heat? Cardiovascular diseases, stroke incidences, right? Or even for infertility, right? Singapore government is very concerned about our fertility rate, okay? And heat is going to affect us even more, especially for men, okay? You all know that for men, right, we cannot have too much heat because the sperms need to have a cooler environment. So when there's increase of heat, it's going to reduce our potency as well, okay? Yeah. So how do TCM cope with heat? Okay, so this is the key point that I want to bring out. In case you all think that TCM is all about drinking warm water and totally abstaining from cold stuff, no, we have tiered strategies as well. So in Chinese, we call it 急则治其标,缓则治其本. In English means, we do symptomatic relief during acute onset. But we do root causative management when your condition is stable. Which means to say, when you are having really very bad heat-related illnesses, like you're having heat exhaustion, you're having heat injuries, you're going to get a heat stroke, am I still going to feed you with warm water? Obviously no, right? I'm going to do the modern medical science method. I'm going to bring down your temperature first. If not, you'll just be gone, okay? So we are not so fixated on just the traditional part. Even for traditional Chinese medicine, we also have this concept. Okay, we need to bring down the heat first before we come and deal with, about preserving your young energy and all the stuff. Okay, so emergencies, like what I mentioned, right? We still need to use methods that will coincide with modern medicine, right? Like, giving ice water, giving you the fan, right? Removing your clothes, make sure you're highly ventilated. Then it's only when in stable condition, then, we do the traditional methods, right? Try to stay clear from cold water, right? Try to keep your place ventilated. So how do I see this, for modern medicine and Chinese medicine? Is that we can work together at different phases. During the emergency phase, when you need really active and aggressive intervention, that's where modern medicine can come in. But during the more, right, peaceful phase, preventive, or even rehabilitation phase, that's where we can do TCM. TLC stands for Tender Loving Care. Okay? Yeah, all right? So we are not at loggerheads with each other. We just that we need to find our position at different phases. Okay, so like for instance, acupressure, right? There are some of the points that we use, right, to help with heat. Of course, you might think that, are these things really going to bring down the heat, the temperature in the body? Not exactly, but it's going to work it indirectly. How? Just remember I mentioned about metaphoric and literal heat, correct? So when we talk about heat, we just don't just mention about literal heat as in, it raises your body temperature. But it's also going to cause a lot of other problems in the body, like, right, causing you to be very agitated, irritated, blood pressure rises. So all these acupoints will help to reduce your blood pressure, will help to slow down your heart rate, therefore bringing down your body temperature. So you see, it does help with heat, but indirectly, okay? So of course, other than, acupressure, so usually for acupressure, for patients, I will tell them you can use it using your vacuum cups, right? Please don't use fire cups, okay, if you're not a professional. If you get yourself scalded with first degree or second degree or third degree burn, it's not my problem, okay? So you do it safely using your vacuum cups, or you can use the gua sha tool as well, right, the jade stone. Okay, I'm going to just run through very quickly all this vegetables, food, dietary therapy that TCM usually will tell patients, to fight against heat, right? Your very common ones like your green beans, right? Job's tears is Chinese barley, right? Winter melon, bean sprouts, watercress. Feel free to take photos, okay? Because I'm going to go through them very quickly. Right, next, like cucumber, lotus root, bitter gourd, celery. Right, the lettuces, your cabbages, right? All these are things that we are considered cooling in nature from TCM perspective. Right, now to come to the fruits, okay? Like tropical fruits like coconuts, okay? Watermelon, honeydew, soursop, pineapples. Okay? Right, kiwi fruits, lime, star fruits, water chestnut, mangosteen, dragon fruit, pears, right? So all these are very common fruits that you have heard, right? Like your mother, your grandmother will tell you, hey, take these fruits when you're feeling very heaty, right? They help to cool you down. Okay, especially for mangosteen. Mangosteen is really something very tropical, right? Mangosteen is known as the queen of fruits, right? It's direct opposites to the king of fruits. Who's the king of fruits? Yeah, we all know durians are very heaty, right? So the queen has to counteract the king, so which is mangosteen. Okay, now go on to common herbs. Okay, like chrysanthemum, chamomile, right? Your green teas, okay? It doesn't matter if it's the Chinese green tea or the Japanese green teas are cooling in nature from TCM perspective. Okay, mint as well. Okay, and here are some of the common Chinese herbs as well, like prunella, mulberry leaves, burdock, kudzu, honeysuckle flower, and American ginseng. Okay, these are the more herbs, okay? They are really herbs, they are not for food, right? Like your ahad fruit, your rush pith, lotus leaf, right? So on and so forth. And then if people, again, I mean, all those are ingredients, right? Sometimes Singaporeans are just very lazy, okay? They just don't want to prepare stuff. Cutting fruits is also I find it a chore. I know, I don't even want to brew anything. They just want something more instant, okay? They can head down to the hawker center, get a sugarcane drink, okay? Or go to stores, you get what? Right, cooling teas, or even the cooling jelly. And then, pandan leaf, grass jelly, all these are also very native to Singapore, right, to help to cope with heat. Okay, so what do you mean by all this heat clearing stuff or cooling stuff? From the biomedical science perspective, all right, how do they bring down the heat? It's not like I said, it's not just directly bringing down the temperature, but bringing down the temperature indirectly through promoting the parasympathetic nervous system and down-regulating the sympathetic nervous system. So by doing this, what happens? It lowers your metabolism, right? And it increases your fluid content. You see, like those fruits and vegetables, they are very juicy. They are very high in water content. So because they have high fluid content, therefore, it helps to also bring down the temperature, right? Lowers your blood pressure, lowers your heart rate, reduces inflammation. So when all these things are done, that's how it brings down the body temperature. So it's done in a very indirect manner, not exactly in a direct manner as what you all might think. Like you're drinking cold water straight away reduces the heat. But Chinese medicine does it from an indirect approach. Okay? And like I mentioned, for Singapore, you want to remove the heat, you cannot not talk about dampness or humidity. So for TCM perspective, it's not just about clearing heat, but we also need to clear the dampness, right? So these are the herbs that will help to remove the dampness, or so-called, improve the humidity. Okay? So, see, all these dampness removing herbs, what do they really do? Diuretic, okay? And they are diaphoretic as well, some of the herbs. Okay? They make you sweat, okay? Give an example like the previous slide, like Sichuan peppercorns, right? How many of you have eaten mala before? Right? Yes. So, actually in Sichuan, the people, why they eat a lot of peppercorns is because Sichuan is also of high humidity as well, because the whole place is surrounded by mountainous regions. So humidity gets trapped very easily. So they need to expel the dampness. They take peppercorns, right? And of course, this cuisine, this form of cuisine has now spread to all parts of the world, right? People are starting to like them as well. And then now I'll talk about this, right? Having a cold shower, having aircon. So from a TCM perspective, are these things valid or what? Right? Like I mentioned, it depends on which is the phase, what phase of the situation you're facing. If you're talking about in an acute emergency phase, then of course you need to use these measures to first bring down the temperature. But when you talk about long run, in the long term, are these things sustainable, right? Especially for the aircon, right? Professor Courtney talked about aircon disease. Actually, there's a proper term. It's called sick office syndrome. Have you heard of that? Right? People get sick, right? It's like musical chair. Today I get sick. Next, my colleague's going to get sick. Next, my boss is going to get sick. And someone's going to get sick one by one. Why? Because in the aircon, right? It circulates. The germ and the virus, there's no ventilation. You know, the windows are closed, the doors are closed. Yeah, of course. Everyone's going to get sick, taking turns. Okay? So with air conditioning, that's the problem. Yes, it gives you the respite, but because of lack of ventilation, it's going to increase the chances of you getting sick as well. Then for cold shower actually in TCM perspective, it helps to improve the immune system, taking cold showers. But, okay, not necessarily helps in long term, right, with managing heat. Okay, lastly, like I mentioned, all right, the yin and yang, I mentioned nothing is absolute, correct? So everything has to be in balance and moderation. Okay? I don't think there's a problem between, you know, Western med's perspective on using cold and Chinese medicine on using warm stuff. To me, it's all about balance and moderation. Okay? So I hope everyone just keep cool and have a glass of warm water. Okay? Okay, with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Physician Yew, for your very insightful presentation with a lot of historical nuggets about and evidence from the past. So finally, we welcome our final speaker, Ms. Lim Gaik Siang, the immediate past president of the Penang Heritage Trust. Ms. Lim is a dedicated heritage conservationist with notable contributions to heritage management and conservation. Her accolades include awards such as the National Treasure Guardian by China's CCTV National Treasure Program. Ms. Lim played a crucial role in the nomination of Georgetown in Penang as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has been actively involved in numerous heritage restoration and cultural preservation projects. She will discuss why heritage conservation is considered green development, drawing examples from Georgetown World Heritage Site, highlighting the role of heritage conservation in sustainable development. Ms. Lim, please.
Good morning, everyone. And it's very interesting to listen to the two speakers' presentation. And I think my topic is a bit different from what you've been talking in the last few days. I'm talking from the heritage perspective, okay? And actually, after visited the Pongo Digital Hub yesterday, I have more feeling about that. Okay, let's see why heritage conservation is considered green development. Let me just do a short introduction. I'm from Malaysia, Penang, okay, and Georgetown Heritage Site is in Ireland. Okay, so the total island of it's an island and it consists of the mainland, and the World Heritage Site is a part of the northeast part of the island, and a total area of Penang Island has a total area of 295 kilometers square, and Georgetown Heritage Site has a total area of 2.62 kilometers square, and we have 92 streets in this Georgetown Heritage Site, okay? And they are including 92 streets and 7 climb jetties. There are a total of 5,285 buildings inside that heritage site, okay? And, okay, so approach, you said, just now you told me where's the timer? Oh, there, okay. So approaches in heritage conservation is actually, we have to adopt cautious approaches in heritage conservation, and the basic principles like maintaining original architecture form, okay, original architecture structure, and using original material. So my background is from chemical, but then I emphasize a lot of material and also original techniques, okay. So can heritage conservation be considered as a green development? There's always a balance, that we must strike a balance between heritage and development. But let's see what is development, okay? Is this called development? You know, for Asian, we have our perception of development is that we have to pull down heritage buildings and build high-rises. And we pull down the heritage building to build green index buildings, high-rises, right? So is this the development that we want? Or just like Hong Kong, you want this type of development? Or after development, we have all this water pollution, and you know, this is what I took from outside, right? There's a raise of temperature of 0.24 degrees per decade for 10 years. And we can see in old photos, those days, people have been wearing long sleeves, even in Penang. But now, we have to wear this, right? Okay, so let's think about it. What is development? Development, according to UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, is to provide a decent standard of living, to increase knowledge, okay, long and healthy life, okay, environmental sustainability. So, in short, development is an improvement of life either in quality, qualitative, quantitative, or both in use of available resources. It doesn't say that we have to pull down heritage building and build high-rises. There's no such definition. So, example from developed countries. Switzerland, is this a developed country? Yes. And do they have a lot of high-rises? No, right? And Germany, okay, maximum height is about 6 stories, okay, and they're still keeping a lot of heritage buildings. So I've been, you know, when I talk to Asians, it's like, oh, you know, in Penang you have all these heritage building, you are stopping development, you know. So all these heritage people, you are just a barrier to development, okay. And so how heritage conservation contributes to development and how we keep from heat. Actually, this heritage building has been built in the era of no electricity. And there is a natural cooling. There's a natural lighting, okay? Okay, so I always say that these heritage buildings are greenhouses, okay? So it has a natural greenhouse effect. So these are the shop house. I mean, is there a pointer? Is there a pointer? No, no pointer. No pointer. Okay. In Penang, you know, we consist of a few thousand of this type of shop house. It's like what you all call Peranakan house. No pointer, right? No, any pointer? Pointer? No pointer, okay. So you all call like Peranakan house in Singapore, right? So actually, Penang is an island. I mean, the area we stay is an island, has very high underground water, and Singapore is an island also. And this Penang is very hot and humid. It has high underground water table. So the shop houses, many predates the introduction of electricity in 1905. We only have electricity in 1905. So it ultimates the natural lightings and ventilation. Structures are resilient to fluctuations in the water table. So, you know, there's a water, as I say, it's been an island. There's a very high water table. That means if you drill, and that's why you can see in the old maps, almost every house got a well, right? And those days we don't have those water taps, so we have wells, and then you can dig water. And some of the houses, you dig below like 6 inches, there's water coming out. Okay? So underground water, actually, you have to keep the hydrostatic pressure. And all these heritage buildings were built without piling. They only use bakau, very simple bakau pile, and not like those modern piling that we have. And because when you have piling, there's a loss of water, and there's a loss of hydrostatic pressure, and the heritage building will like tilt. Okay. Okay, so this shop house is an identity of Georgetown in terms of spatial concept. It is very narrow and long. Do you know why? In those days, actually, Penang was British colonial since 1786 until 1957. Okay, much earlier than Singapore or Hong Kong. So in those days, the British government imposed tax for the building according to the width of the building, of the facade. So the people is like, okay, you charge me high tax for a broader building, I make it narrow and very narrow and long. So we have the same total area, right? But when you have very narrow and long building, it's going to be very dark and there's no good ventilation. So, okay, and there's a 5-foot way, okay? And the 5-foot way was imposed by Stamford Raffles in 1822 in Singapore. Singapore, Penang, and Malacca was a straight settlement, and there's, the government office was here. So Stamford Raffles was the one that imposed the regulation of every shop house should have 5-foot way so that people will be sheltered from the heat of the sun. And you don't have to build another canopy. So 5-foot way is below the house, okay? Okay. And it provides shelter, and there's a public right of access. Okay. So in fact, there's a law. The law says that you cannot block the 5-foot way, so that everybody has the right to access using the 5-foot way to prevent them from the heat. Okay. So, and also no snatch thief, right? Okay. And in Penang, those days, they blocked the 5-foot way, and then they tried to make pedestrian outside, and then they say it's too hot, then they have to make shelter again, and then it blocks all the ventilations and become hotter and hotter. Okay. So, okay, and in those days, we built a lot of this type of shop houses. It called shop house means that it can use as a shop and as a house. That means downstairs is a shop and upstairs is a house. I used to stay in those shop houses, and my grandfather operated a charcoal shop, and we stay in the house. He didn't have to travel by car or whatever. There's no carbon footprint, zero carbon footprint. Okay, so and the idea of work from home have started long time ago, not until COVID, right? We have work from home. Okay, and because as I say, the house is narrow and long. Every 20 feet there is an air well. So the air well provides ventilation. Okay, so we don't need aircon. And we don't need to have lightings. Those days without LED lights, the lights generate heat, right? And it provide, when the air well, it provide good ventilations and also good water flow, so there's no flood in the house. Okay. Oh, and some people even plant trees in the air well, so that it generates oxygen. Okay, and there's free air purifier provides oxygen in the house. Right? Okay, so the design of shop house, actually they have different design according to different eras. The shortest is the one that very old, and then come to the modern style. Okay, and this is a typical design of shop house. Upstairs there's a fan light to provide lightings. Downstairs there are 2 air vents, and then there are windows. Okay, so the air vents to provide ventilations. The fan lights will provide lightings, windows to provide ventilations, wooden carved doors, which also is hollows, that we can provide ventilations. Okay, and the shop house has been made from using sustainable material. Like for floor, we don't use cement, and we use those porous terracotta floor, which can allow the water vapor to come out and breathe. Okay. And then resistant to mold and bacteria, and it's fire resistant. It's a good insulator. So you can feel the floor is cool compared to cemented floor. Okay? And bricks, okay. In the heritage building, the bricks were burned. In those days, bricks were burned that it is breathable. Okay, that means that the bricks is laid, and these bricks were breathable. Underground water can come out. The moisture can come out. And then, once the wind blows, it will carry away the water vapor, and there's a cooling effect. Imagine that now we have water cooler fan or something, right? Okay, and you don't need electricity, and it brings down the heat. Okay, and then it's inert to almost all chemical reaction. Okay, and it's also good thermal insulation. So, when you use the traditional bricks, the house, inside the house is cooler compared to you use those modern bricks. Okay? Okay. And then after we lay the bricks, we use lime plaster. Lime plaster is made from oyster shells. And lime plaster, again, can allow the water vapor to come out from the lime plaster. We call it can breathe. Again, it will allow moisture to come out from the building, and then it will have a cooling effect. Okay? Then after lime plaster, then we use lime wash to paint the house. And again, that is a It's a breathable material. Okay. And the roof tile used is also made of terracotta, same material as the floor, and it can allow water vapor, not water, water vapor to breathe out from the house. So it will keep the house cool without electricity. It's natural cooling. So I always say, this is a good ecosystem of architectural ecosystem. But if once you break the ecosystem, then when you affect the ecosystem, the house is going to be hot. Okay? Okay. And the door has it has the ventilations. It has holes for ventilations. Okay, and this door is able to absorb vibration and heat, and it can be easily painted. And it also has aesthetic, very nice carved doors, right? Even inside the house, there are screens, and the screens is also hollow. It's carved with very nice design, and it allows ventilations to bring out the heat. Okay, and the floor, actually the house upstairs usually made from floor. The floor can absorb vibration, and some of them have a small tiny hole, gaps in between, so that the air can just go down or up from the building. Good, that provides ventilation. Okay, then as I mentioned, air well. Okay, so air well is the place that sometimes it's a place that let the heat go out. And some people, they just like to cover up. Because they say, oh, this air well occupies space. I need to use the space. That's where they interrupt the ecosystem of the building. Okay, so I have to tell them, oh, according to Chinese belief, air well is a place where the money comes in. And once you cover up the air well, money cannot come in, right? Yeah. Okay. So unsympathetic developments are not fit for heritage cities. Why? Piling. When people do piling, it is disturbing the hydrostatic pressure underground, and then the house may be tilt or sink. Okay. Concrete, cement. Cement is not environmental friendly. It releases a lot of carbon dioxide. And also, it's not permeable. That means that if you stay in a room that made of cement, it is hotter compared to the room that plaster with lime plaster. Okay, I restored a heritage building which it was the oldest Chinese medical hall in Southeast Asia, called Ren Ai Tang, and it's turned into a heritage hotel. And we use the traditional material. It's aircon now, of course. And sometimes you feel that after the customer check out at 12 noon, and you go into the room at 6 p.m., it's still cool. Even the aircon is off. Okay, so cement has low tensile strength, and actually cement is not a treat to everybody, every building. Cement have a lifespan of 50 years only, and it will crack. Okay, or your sink, and then let's say this is the wall. One side is painted with cement, and one side is painted with lime plaster. The moisture will be trapped inside. And then if you push some salt out to the neighbor, it would damage the building, okay? Okay, so this is damage done by the building that, plaster with cement, okay? Okay, I give example of these two buildings. The building on the right is the Sun Yat-sen Museum, which I make the exhibition there, and I restore this building. Next door, actually, now is the Teochew Puppet Museum, which also I started that. But the next door wasn't restored by me. This Teochew Puppet Museum on the left actually was restored using cement. And they block out the air well. And the building on the right was restored with the correct material, and the air well is open, the one with the plants inside, okay? And there was one day when there was an event in the Puppet Museum, aircon, it's aircon. We went in, then we have event. After the event, I brought a few friends, say, hey, let's go to next door to see Dr. Sun Yat-sen exhibition. And we went to next door, they say, oh, this place is cooler. The aircon is better. I said, no, there's no aircon. You came from a place that have aircon, and you feel that the one without aircon is cooler. Why? Because the one with aircon, there's humid. It doesn't remove the humidity, the moisture. But the one without aircon has the natural ventilation, and moisture is being removed. Sometimes we say, oh, the place is so stuffy. Why stuffy? Because it's moisture that trapped in the atmosphere, You know, there's no ventilation and you feel hot. That's where the heat comes from. Okay, so conclusion, when you build a new building, we have to have new material, and then there's an environmental impact, right? And when you use the wrong material, you use the modern material, it releases the heat to environment, then we have to install aircon. Once you install aircon, the aircon compressor will release the heat, and then next door will get the heat, and next door to install aircon. And more aircon is going to be installed, okay? I'm in refrigeration industry, in fact, but not aircon, it's the compressed air drying, okay? So I know all this theory, okay? So, how to go back? Never mind. So, yeah. And when you build the new buildings, we have to chop a lot of trees. And once you chop down the trees, the environment is going to be hotter, right? Because there's no shield from sun. And restoration will save the environment because we don't chop trees, we don't go and do mining. Okay, so, and the materials are organic, so it doesn't harm the environment. Okay, so heritage conservation is a green development, it's a sustainable development, and leave more natural resources for future generations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lim. Can I invite you to stay on the stage? And can I also invite the other speakers up for a Q&A session? Yeah. Yeah, I think the audience will be very interested. There are a lot of questions on Pigeonhole, but maybe before we start off before we go to the Pigeonhole questions, I would like to ask a general question to the panelists, and maybe if you have some time, you'll go through the Pigeonhole questions. So to the panelists, I think maybe the audience will be interested to find out about this. In what ways do you think the anti-heat and cooling measures that you have presented today can complement present-day biomedical, scientific, and technological heat mitigation measures that are being employed by different organizations and societies? So, yeah.
Yeah, so as I alluded to at the end of my talk, a lot of the stuff that people used to do historically in Wuhan is just no longer viable, right? So you can't sleep outside because of the urban heat island effect, because there's now more light pollution, noise pollution, more traffic, all of these types of things. So despite the fact that people are very nostalgic, or some people are very nostalgic for this era where everyone used to sleep outside, it's not really something that people can do. However, some things that I have noticed that people have semi-replicated this type of thing is by forming their own kind of like cooling shelters during kind of ersatz cooling shelters during hot periods of the year. So when they built the new subway system in Wuhan about 10 years ago, immediately all of these elderly people had their fold-away stools, and they would go to the subway station, and they would sit in the subway station, make use of the free aircon, playing games together, telling stories, these types of things. And very soon you saw signs going up, no loitering in the subway station. I actually think that's very short-sighted, because what they were doing really was, rather than all staying at home blasting their own air conditioning, making use of a kind of communal resource. So they are actually starting to do this type of thing in some places in China during periods of extreme heat. They have these kind of cooling centers, particularly for elderly people. So although you're not going to be able to go back to what people did in the past, and it probably wouldn't want to, right? It wasn't very comfortable sleeping outside. There are sort of ways you can replicate these communal responses to heat rather than highly individualized ones.
Brandon or Ms. Lim, do you have anything to add?
Actually, as I presented, actually, if we don't pull down the old buildings, which was made of the environmental friendly materials, and the design, as I mentioned just now, it will help to cut down the heat released too, because you don't use so much aircon, because aircon actually is a culprit. Aircon and cars is a culprit to the heat, right? So, and working from, the shop house is designed that you can work from home. So there are two things that will help to cut down the heat in the environment.
Thank you very much. I would want to highlight one question about TCM. So for this question, TCM, as you say, uses an individualistic approach, recognizing differences in body composition. How can this principle guide heat action plans to address gender or age-specific needs and vulnerabilities?
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Basically, right, the problem with TCM is that because it's so individualistic, right? So you can have a very general approach, but we need to do a lot of studies as well. And the problem with TCM-related clinical trials and studies is that it's not very in favor. It's not very favored. It's not very supported as well, right? Despite we have the grants and everything, because it stems from misconceptions. It stems from prejudice as well. I'm pretty sure. Okay, I don't want to paint a rosy picture, but yeah, there are still a lot of misgivings, biasness towards traditional medicine. So, in order to make TCM theories be more substantiated, we need evidence, we need to do more research. I only can say this. Yeah, it's only when we do research then we are able to put all these theories into actual practice. Yeah. So I believe that what TCM has to offer, right, with regards to this question, is definitely very valuable. It's just that we need to do the research. Yes.
Thank you, Brandon. Indeed, I think more research is needed, especially if you want to incorporate TCM perspectives. So one question that has that seems to be interesting comes from one of the quotes by Professor Courtney. So you said to use air conditioning, you have to literally close the doors on your neighbors. What can we do for populations like women or marginalized groups who historically lack access to cooling? So maybe Professor Courtney or, yeah.
I think that's a really fantastic question. I mean, it's not something that comes up that much in my own research just because air conditioning is so ubiquitous in Wuhan today. Everybody pretty much has it. When I first moved to Wuhan, it was not uncommon to go to houses of people who did not have toilets, but they did have air conditioners. That was kind of the beginning of the 2000s. That's how ubiquitous it is. I would perhaps like to highlight the work of some other scholars working on this type of thing. So Nashin Anwar and people working on Karachi have specific projects dealing with how marginalized communities, impoverished communities can get access to various different forms of cooling. So, for example, in Karachi, people living in slums now are using air conditioning units that have been adapted from shipping containers, these types of things. So this kind of language that you have to describe the use of air conditioning as if it's just a bourgeois technology of relatively wealthy places is no longer applicable. We need to rethink the way we're thinking about these technologies. These technologies are being used all the way across Asia and sometimes in very impoverished communities as well. Unfortunately, some of these technologies, like those shipping aircon, they don't last very long. They're also full of HFCs. They're very bad for the environment. So precisely what I was talking about before, thinking about kind of more integrated communal responses to cooling and actually giving people access to these types of cooling technologies, I think is kind of essential in a rapidly heating world.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, I think the everyday popularization of these technologies are important. Also, I just wanted to maybe pass this question over to Ms. Lim in terms of heritage building and how it can actually, give access to different communities for cooling. Do you think there's a role for heritage buildings in sort of providing such access to marginalized communities or communities who need such cooling?
Okay, actually, the heritage buildings were built, interestingly, that the first, the shop houses has different sections. So after you enter, 20 feet later, there is a screen, and then there's an air well. Then after that, there's a main hall, and then there's another screen and another air well. So the first hall actually is for men those days, for gas or whatever. But then the second hall actually is for the women to peep through the screen. The holes, there are wood carvings, and they can peep through and see who is inside. And actually, the women inside the house have the chance to have natural cooling because they stay in the house that is naturally cool. And you know, we have a corridor where the wind blow through the front window, and it's very cool. And that's where the lady will sit inside to cool down in the afternoon and have an afternoon nap sometimes. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So maybe there can be some learnings from these heritage houses in terms of.
So I invite you all to come to Georgetown, yeah, to have a look.
Okay. Yeah, maybe one question that for Physician Yew to answer is, should I or can I drink cold water after strenuous exercise from a TCM point of view?
That depends on the. I can. Okay, so that depends on how you feel after a strenuous exercise. If you feel very giddy, lightheaded, like you're gonna drop any moment, please, you take some cold water, because it means most probably you are very badly dehydrated, and you might really be suffering some form of heat exhaustion. You know, so yeah, so it really depends on how you feel at that kind of moment. But if you feel okay, you know, I'm fine, you know, I just feel a little bit breathless, a bit sweaty, then drinking some warm water actually helps, because, you know, when the muscles are also heated up, right, suddenly you just drink cold water. What happens? The muscle will contract very fast. So it actually might do damage to the body in a certain aspect. So it really depends on how you feel. Yeah, like you had an outdoor run, you know, you're sweating and you're feeling very, you know, not right. Yeah, please do the cold water stuff first, right? You need to treat the acute problem first before you address the actual problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe we do not have time to answer more questions, so, but may I invite the audience to once again thank the presenters, and also if you have time later on, you can engage them with your questions. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much.